but I am recording now. Welcome and good morning. My name again is Teresa Gibson. I'm the Executive Director for the Science Fair Foundation. And today I will be mostly quiet, but I will be monitoring the chat. And if you have any technical issues or questions for the facilitators, you can drop them in there and I will work to get their attention and get you some responses as needed. If you need a little orientation to Zoom, mostly your controls are just at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see them, you can mouse over the bottom of your screen and they should pop up for you. And with that, I am going to throw it to our facilitators, Judy and Manley.
Okay, thank you.
And good morning. I'm going to go ahead and put the presentation up, and I've got to move it over so I can see it and get it started. This looks familiar. I want to thank everyone who sent in their results for the paper towels and also sending in their topic and their question. The sheets that we've given to you are the ones of people who sent in their results and their questions and topics by yesterday about noon. And if you send it in after that, it's, you know, we still got it, but it's not on the list because we needed it for the class. It was yesterday afternoon and we haven't edited it to send it back out to you. It's just to give information. So I'm going to pass it on to Manley and let him discuss the paper towel experiment that everyone did.
Okay, well here was our question that we had. How much water will one towel hold or absorb? And thank you for sending in the data. And let's go to the next one, Judy, and see. And what we're going to do today is talk about the data that came in and the methods that we use. And we're going to discuss variables and wonder if we controlled everything we needed to control. Sometimes variables crop up that we didn't know about or think about. And then we're going to try to draw some conclusions about that. So that's what we'll be working with today.
Okay, so
Yeah.
do you want me to bring up the elementary data first?
Yeah.
All right, so let me stop sharing. And this time, share the screen.
As you teach this year at school, you're probably quickly finding out that if you do a lab with the students, you know, if they got everything at home, that makes it a little bit better, but of course, most of the time they're not going to have everything at home. And this is a case where, you know, people did have things at home, but they didn't have everything. It's like you might not have had 3 kinds of towels. And if we had done this face-to-face, I'd have had groups of 3 all over the classroom, probably 8 or 9 groups in my class. And every group would have had the same 3 towels to test. So that way we'd have had a lot of replication. But as you can see from the data, we had a lot of folks using Bounty. And the little 2 means whoever, like the first one says Bounty and has a 2, that means that was a Select-A-Size, and the person used 2 Select-A-Size towels. The next person had full-size Bounty towels, and so on. One thing that I do in class is once they finished, the recorder comes up and records the data for each towel, and all they do is they put the, you know, I have the names of the towels up there already, and they put how much each towel absorbed. And then after all that data is up there, I go group to group out loud in front of everybody, and they describe the procedure they used. And the main reason we do this particular activity is not necessarily to learn about which towels better or absorbs more, is to learn how to design a lab and to learn about variables. And I could just stand up and teach about variables, and that wouldn't stick with the students, but this sticks with them a lot better, I have found in the past. So let's say, for example, the very first group, the very first person, Bounty 2, they absorbed 25 milliliters, and they poured 2 teaspoons on the towel. They kept doing that until they had to make a judgment the towel was wet. They did do this twice, and they got the same number, 25, both times. But there's some judgment there on when the towel is wet. And you can notice the numbers now. We got some high numbers, much higher than I've ever gotten before. 58 is pretty high for the third one. And we got down 60, a 75, and a 70 down the line there, and there's a question mark. And then somebody got 79. I've never had a Bounty. I've probably done this 1,000 times. Truly, I have. I've never had a Bounty hold that much. So sometimes when I see numbers, I'm a little suspect about numbers sometimes. I try to tell students as they're telling me their procedure, and I'm recording it, and I'm kind of abbreviating it. I try not to tell them they've done anything wrong, but I want them to look at the data. And if they have an outlier, like an extremely low number or extremely high number, they begin to examine that and maybe find some reason why their number is so different than other people's. And then sometimes I might not have all the information, so I ask them questions. Like I'm looking about one of the bounties, the one that has 60, 75, and 70 for the absorption rate. I had a lot of questions about that particular one. They said it was flat in the pan, then they tilted the pan, and they added water. And so I'm guessing they added water at one end of the pan and had it run down through the towel until it dripped, and until it made it all the way down the towel to the bottom. And so I had a question about, I wasn't clear about how they let it drip. And I was wondering if they got the entire towel wet. They probably did with 70. And then, you know, they didn't really truly, I'm not sure they answered the question from the description they did. Some people draped the towel across the pan, and I wasn't sure they got it completely wet. And there were, you know, we had lots of different things that were tried. And you see drip, like one of the bounty groups about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 down, they put it flat in the pan. They added 8 tablespoons of water. They lifted the towel out. Now, I would ask the students how they lifted it out. Was it folded or was it unfolded? Did they pick it up by a corner? But they did let it drip for 30 seconds, and then they measured what was left and subtracted that. And then they also did the one right below that. They added 80 to it, 80 milliliters to it, and then they lifted it out. This time they let it drip for 60 seconds. So anyway, so I go through all that with all the students, and they have to kind of weigh things out. You can see further down the list, we had some others like Brawny. It did bother the students when I have Brawny as one of the choices. It really bothers them that Brawny is so large. They're all the same width because they had to fit in those dispensers, but Brawny is longer even than Bounty. Scott Towels is shorter, and it's funny, they advertise they have more towels per roll than anybody else usually, and but they have shorter towels. And you can see the data for others, like Hannaford. We had somebody that tested it 3 times. That helped. And we only had 1 Harris Teeter, but 3 Kirklands, and so on, all the way down. So you got the data, and you don't have a lot of replication for some of the other brands there. But there are a lot of questions. And you may ask some questions in a minute, but we had people letting it drip for 60 seconds, letting it drip for 30, not letting it drip at all, letting it drip until it was 3 seconds between drips. We had it balled up. We had it folded lots of different ways. So there were a lot of variables here. And when this is all said and done, if I did this in class, I would maybe, they would do it differently, but for the most part, most groups find a way to wet the towel. If they're a little stingy with the water, let's say, I'm going to look at Hannaford and pick on that one a little, not Hannaford, but let's say a Bounty. There's a Bounty that added 5 tablespoons, and they had to decide when it was wet. That's about the 4th one down. And they're saying it held 15. That's a low number. And when you look at some of the other numbers, when they see the data, they go, wait, maybe we should have given it more of a chance to absorb and poured a lot in. There's nothing wrong with pouring a lot of water in, since you're going to measure what's left anyway. So sometimes if they want to just pour 10 and then 10 more and 10 more milliliters, and they say, oh, that's enough, it looks wet. It's maybe not dripping yet, it could hold some more. Lots of variables. This particular experiment had one variable that was different on purpose, and that would be the kind of paper towel. And that's the thing that we are going to measure that's going to be different. That's our independent variable. And what we measure about it is how much water it will absorb. The thing we're measuring is the dependent variable. So we choose paper towels. You know, we choose the things we're going to test. That's being our independent variable. And then we're hoping we can make a statement later that says, you know, that connects how much it absorbs to the type of towel. And we think the amount that the towel absorbs depends on the kind of towel. And so in our final conclusion, we'd want to make a statement that kind of join those two things. Other variables, I mentioned several already. You know, we had another variable here. Some of you used tablespoons, some used cups, and we didn't have a lot of graduated cylinders, which would have been nice. But and and we had so many different people at different places, not watching each other, not working together. So there could be a lot of human variation in our way we do things, in addition to how long we let it drip and fold, and how we take it out of the water is pretty important. We'll maybe come back to that a little bit later. Judy, is that Sparkle the last one? I guess it's close to the
Yes.
last one.
Yeah, there's a question mark right below it.
Share the high school data, middle high.
Okay, let me do that right quick.
And I'm sure the middle high people, especially the high school people, probably wrote a lot more instructions for their procedure because they've done a lot more labs and taking a lot more
I
science.
did, so let me get it up here and so
I'm
you
sure
can
Judy
see
got
it.
a lot more detail. Yeah, I see already. There's a lot more detail on these, you can tell.
Right. Yeah,
Now I got one, it's jumping around a little bit, but that bounty that says 186.6 milliliters, that's pretty precise in that it's got a 0.6 milliliters, but 186 is a lot. And they put 225 in, and that one's hard to believe. And they repeated it 3 times. Never had anything approach that. Now Viva is a different kind of towel. I'd ask people not to use Viva because it's almost a cloth. But it's even got Scott holding 176 milliliters. And so that's the same person that did all 3 of those, probably. Isn't that right, Judy? You had them
it is.
together. So that is very high when you see others at like 9 and 15 and 13. Different people. There's a bounty down below that's got 14, and the Viva held 15, and another one held 12. So look at the numbers, 12, 14, 15 versus almost 203. That's I'd want to see what they did again. And
so
yeah.
the Viva, the bounty and members marked down here, they cut the sheets into 15 by 15 sheets. And I'll let you talk about that if you want
But
to.
that's one reason their number's lower. Okay, they cut the sheets. And if you cut the sheets, they don't know how much an entire sheet would hold. They aren't answering the question, how much will one sheet of each towel hold, is not being answered. Now they might find a way to multiply that, figure out the square centimeters or whatever, and then multiply their number, measure theirs and find out what portion of the towel that is, and then multiply that, and they can calculate what the entire whole towel will hold. And that could be done, but they basically changed the question. Anybody in the group want to say, tell me what question that they're actually answering by doing that, by cutting the towels? Since we only have people.
Right, they cut the towel and they also squeezed it.
Okay, and then they measured how much they squeezed out and how much was left also. So,
right, they did measure how much they squeezed out.
Yeah, I'll talk about squeezing in a minute. They did 2 things. Somebody want to say, take a stab at what question they're answering?
Would it have to do with how the edges were changed and the capillary action within that?
Well, their capillary action might be different. They didn't say anything about time, but what they did was they measured how much a certain size material of each type would hold, which is a good thing to know. They're finding out which material might be more absorbent for the towels. They might vary, even though there might be 2-ply towels, all of them, they might vary a little in thickness. But yeah, it would affect possibly the capillary action, cutting them, and it'd be jagged. But the question they would be answering is which material of those towels would hold the most of the 3 types they tested, which is good. Like I say, it's good to know. Now squeezing, I usually let one group squeeze it when I have a whole class of about 8 or 9 groups, but they usually realize that the water they squeezed out was water that the towel absorbed. So when they pull it out and they squeeze it into another container and measure what they squeeze out, that was absorbed. And then if they want to know what was in the towel, they can subtract that number they squeezed out from their starting number. That will tell them what's in the towel. So they'll turn around and add what's in the towel to the number that got squeezed out, and they realize, oh, we didn't need to squeeze it in the first place. All we needed to do was wet the towel, pull it out, and measure what was left. And students do lots of different things. The variables, they have variables that they don't control, or they control them differently. But for the most part, that's what most of them do. They find a way to wet it, take the towel out, measure what's left. So and you'll have this data. You can look at and just analyze it.
There was one person that squeezed it, but they actually then weighed the towel. And I was looking at and see if I saw that one right bouncing out at me, but I thought that was interesting because that way they were accounting for the amount of material, amount of water that was still in the towel by weighing it.
That's good. Well, we didn't
Because
ask.
I weighed it dry and then weighed it wet.
Yeah, we didn't ask you to use a scale, but the scale is probably accurate to the closest gram at least. And the good thing is, since we used water, 1 gram of water is also 1 milliliter of water. So if you did grams, you probably had a really accurate, I mean, if you had a scale, you probably had a really accurate measure of the amount of water that was left in things. Or
Right. Another thing that several people did, and I didn't put it in there because I wrote a whole bunch anyway. You know, when you pour, because of surface tension, sometimes when you pour the water, you'll end up with kind of a bubble on top of it. And so they were using the ruler to remove that to make sure they were accurately counting the amount of water that they were putting in when they were using tablespoons and teaspoons and things like that. So,
yeah, they were doing level teaspoons, which is good.
right. So,
It's funny how water will bubble up in a teaspoon or a tablespoon, but you put it in a graduated cylinder and it will actually go the other way.
goes the other way.
Rest of the meniscuses. Yeah. And in class, I would have used graduated cylinders. Everybody would have had the same materials. Now, what we're going to do, Judy, I think, we can jump to the slide now, what they would do if they did it next.
Yes, just a moment. I'm getting better at this switching back and forth.
This might be the strongest part of the whole thing, is when this is all said and done, my students look at all the data and they decide if we did this again, how would we design it? And in science, sometimes scientists design an experiment and they test it and they run it and they realize there might be some variables they could have controlled better. So they make that original experiment a trial experiment, and then they redesign it. And that's what we're going to ask you to do on the next slide, is to think out loud. And we can do this. You can unmute yourselves and make comments now, since we don't have many people. If you did this again, what would you change, or how would you do it? Somebody want to tell us? All right, all I'm hearing is crickets.
I would be more specific with my measurements.
Uh-huh. So you try to get a better tool to measure, more accurate.
Yes.
Yeah. How do we handle the drip?
With maybe a timer.
Okay, that's good.
Cody, I see you answered in the chat. If you want to share with us, you can unmute and. So Cody was saying that he folded up the paper towel to dip it into the water instead to lay it flat so it can absorb better.
Okay. Generally, I'll tell you, we're all short for time here. When I do this with students and they think out loud, they usually say, if we did this again, we might want to do it in the pan, and we might quarter fold the towel. And Judy, I want them to see me in just a minute. So we're going to if we can pop off, quit sharing, and I'm going to show them about folds. And then we're going to wet the towel, and why not just go ahead and wet it? They might want to pour 100 in there in the pan. You know, start with 100 and pour 100 in, and then we take the towel out and we decide about the drip. We might let it drip 10 seconds. And typically when you use paper towels at home, you want to get out of there quickly, so you might not let them drip long. And anyway, out of there, take the towel out and then measure what's left and subtract. Let me show you about folding. Can you see me okay, Judy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
I got a piece of paper here. I'm going to undo full screen so I can make sure I hold it up high enough. Okay. Here's a piece of paper. We're going to pretend it's a paper towel. I thought this might be a little easier to see than I did a towel last night. But I'm going to quarter fold it. I'm going to fold it once this way. And then I'm going to fold it again the other way. So I got it's quarter folded. Now that will fit in the pan. You can put it in the pan and wet it. But I always ask the students who folded it, how did you take it out? And a lot of times they look at me puzzled and they go, by the corner. I said, which corner? They don't know. And so you can see, I'm going to unfold it a little. Okay, there's a fold, and see if it's still going to be hard for you to see it. Okay, I'm going to put it back together. And I can tell you that if I pick it up by this corner, this is side's fold. It has two folds, and this is a fold. It actually will, I'll pull more water out with the towel if I do it that way. If I take the opposite corner, this one, this is open and this is open. More water will drip out as I'm lifting the towel this way. So I'll actually, it'll show less water absorbed. And if I do one of the other two corners, I got this side's folded, this side's open. And if I do it just, I got one open, one folded. So I'm going to get about 3 different amounts of water that come out of the towel depending on how I pick it up. So the students usually say, oh, when we take it out, we're going to unfold it and make sure it's completely unfolded, maybe let it drip for however long they want to let it drip, and they'll do it the same. And of course, their data is going to be more the same. Ordinarily, after this, they're about ready to design some experiments, but you can go back to the slides now, Judy. I'll try to be quick about this. Okay, we're a little ahead of last night. These are good questions to ask. When I've observed so many classes, I go into a lot of classes and I hear questions being asked that are recall questions. Recall is important about a lot of things, but if we're trying to get students to design an experiment and think, we need to ask questions like these. I would recommend that you maybe print this out. I'd even laminate, print it out, put it somewhere. Look at these questions often, and the more you read this and more times you look at it, you'll begin to ask these types of questions more. And these are really good questions to get the students to start thinking, and especially if you're doing inquiry or engineering. I think we can go to the next one. So copy that one and keep it, use it. Now, what I want you to do, and we'll do this, we won't do the chat on this either. I want you to unmute yourselves, and I want you to think about one activity that you do. You don't have to describe the whole activity. You might tell the title of it or what's the topic, what's it about, what do you basically do? Like are you doing something with pendulums or whatever? But do you have an activity you do already with students where you give them instructions, but you might be able to make it more inquiry based and let them come up with the variables that they want to test, more like what we've done here. So let's just take a few minutes here and let you tell us one you might want to change. Let's get somebody elementary. Tell us one you might want to change. Start with the elementary, then we'll do middle, then high. Do we have an elementary person in the group or two?
When I'm in force and motion unit, we do quite a few experiments with different materials just to see how things interact. And one thing that we do a lot, not a lot though, that we do that the kids love a lot is we make roller coasters. And we always use pipe insulation and marbles to roll down. I could let them have different balls that were the same size, not just marbles, so they could see the effects of friction more based on who chose what.
Good. That's a good one to do. And one thing is you can take some of that tubing and keep it straight and make an inclined plane and let them vary, just in that one inclined plane, how far the marble rolls across the carpet. You need to do carpet because if you do it on tile, it'll go forever. But they can change the variables. They can change the angle. They can change where they put it. As long as they don't push it, as long as they don't push the marble, they can put it different places and talk about how changing the position of the marble, will affect how far it rolls and the energy it has. Lots you can do. Roller coasters are great to do. That's a good example where, they have to come up with all the variables. And what you're trying to do with the roller coaster is see who can keep it on the same amount of tubing and, take the longest time. Usually on that one, you want to see who can put it in the roller coaster, has to come out the end, but who can make it take the longest. And they kind of figure out the variables. I used to do the same thing with carpet tubing and tennis balls with younger children. Another person, how about a middle school person? All right. All right, Cheryl, let's hear you. Milk.
Well, I was saying, so we also do forces in motion in 7th grade science. And instead of, I think you were talking about the cookbook labs, we, have a kind of a manual that lays it all out, but incorporating some different ways to change the variables. And that would be pretty easy with the materials that we already have. So just thinking about what's been given to us and how we can make it more question-based and not just the cookbook lab that we tend to use.
Yeah, that's a great topic. Force of motion is a great topic to let them control some of the variables. So that's good. Very good. How about high school? We have somebody that's not physics. We've had two that were kind of physics related. We've got somebody that's biology or earth science or.
Hello, so I am chemistry, anatomy, and biology, kind of a mix of everything for my school. And one thing that I do early in the year with chemistry is a reaction rate lab with Alka-Seltzer tablets and different temperature of water. Some may be crushed up, some may be in half, and I always give the different groups what option they have to start with. So I could maybe let them brainstorm of the different things that they could do versus saying, okay, you do hot versus cold, you do crushed up versus whole tablet.
Yeah.
So you're gonna let them come up with the ways they want to do it, as long as they run it by you, maybe. Okay.
One of the
Yeah, of
things
course.
to do, yeah, with that Alka-Seltzer lab, as long as you give them all a whole tablet, then they're all starting with the same amount of material of the chemical to react, so they can actually compare the results across the entire classroom.
Yeah, I do that in a plastic bag, like a sandwich bag, just sealable. Put them in a sealable sandwich bag, and they have to do the reaction in the bag and all that kind of stuff.
Alka-Seltzers are great. There are all kinds of different studies you can do with the Alka-Seltzer. I'm working with a friend on doing that for a presentation, and I'll be happy to send that one to you if you're interested.
Oh, I am definitely interested. Thank you very much.
This gives us some ideas. What I'd like to do for me, the biggest goal, it's great if you go to a science fair, and we'll be glad to help you even after the workshop's over. If you're leading one or planning one or whatever, we'll be glad to help you with that throughout the whole next year. So we want you to keep contact with us. But to me, the biggest goal is to get folks to do more of this in their classroom with their normal activities. So we just talked about one. As you plan your upcoming school year, if you can think about the things you do throughout the year and try to make as many as you can. We don't have time in the school, even in the 180-day school year, to maybe do everything this way, but we could surely do a lot more. And so it'd be nice if you could maybe first year try about 10, and even up that the second year, 10 of your labs or whatever to be different. It's a shame. I was observing a teacher one time who was an award-winning teacher. And I was expecting to see these great things. And I asked the students, I looked at their notebooks. I said, well, when's the last time you did a lab? And they said, what is that? I went, oh my gosh. And one of the students said, I think we did one last semester. So if you do these, teaching is going to be easier and it's going to be more fun. And the students are going to learn to think. Okay, Judy, I think we're ready for the next.
Okay. All right, let me get on this. So the other assignment that you had was working on developing a testable question. And we've pulled again, we don't have everybody's in there because the lists are the ones that we made that we stopped at noon, but we are crediting you for sending in your work. And I guess this is where we need to drop in the advertisement. To get the full 1 CEU, we do need homework assignments turned in to us. And we accept them late if they haven't been turned in, but we will get them, we need to have that from you. So talking about the question, quick reminder, when we talked about a testable question last week, we said that you have to include your topic. What is it that you're being changed or tested? And remember, that's going to be like the paper towel, which would be your independent variable. And what are you going to be measuring, which is your dependent variable, which would be like the water in that activity. So one of the things I really didn't talk about a lot, but if you're working with students that are going to be doing a research project, you need to bring these two things into consideration. If they are going to be staying in your room, the project being unique is not quite as important. But if that project is going to be done to go to a competition, whether it's a school competition or hopefully maybe a regional competition, then it needs to be unique. And I've told you before, and I'll say it again, I have a love-hate relationship with Science Buddies. They have some excellent tools for teachers to be able to use. And I encourage you to take advantage of any tool that you find that will help you do research with your students. But the thing that Science Buddies does provide is lots of set experiments that students tend to select those and work on those. If they do the experiment that they read in a book, or winning science fair experiments, or that's on Science Buddies or somewhere else, copy something that somebody else did, then that is not a unique project. We pretty much know the answer to it. And part of the judging is how original this is. So you want to try to steer the student to learning how, if they have a project like that, they can do that as background information, but then they need to learn how to ask a different question based on what they've learned. The other thing they need to consider is it a project that can be done by a student? There's some great things. I mean, we'd all like to go out there and solve and cure cancer. Right now, it's let's find the cure for COVID-19. But that's not something you're going to be able to do in an elementary, middle school, or high school lab. High school students often work with very sophisticated things if they are working in a research laboratory, but they have to have those special materials that may not be available to all your students. So you may be able to help them find things, but you need to look, is this something that can be done before they spend a lot of time working on it? And for each question, they need to really be looking at, does it have these components within it? And so that's kind of what we're going to look at right now. I pulled some questions that were sent in to me, and we had some great questions. We had some that need a little bit of tweaking. And since we've got a small group, I'd like everybody to give your feedback on, and again, since we're so small, you can give it orally, you don't have to type it in, on the different questions. All right, so the first one is, does a rooftop, and the topic was a rooftop garden, and then they developed things about that. Does the rooftop garden reduce the temperature inside a building? So let's think about, do they have their topic? Yes, no. They've got that in there. Well, I'll skip that one because we pretty much said it. All right, so then what they want to do is to find out if it will reduce the temperature inside of building. Now, how are we going to measure that? Can anybody give some comments? How do you think we could measure this? To set up an activity so we could measure a temperature inside of a building that might be affected by a rooftop garden. Because this, the way reason I'm doing this is these are questions that your students may bring to you, and you need to help them determine whether it's something they can do or not. So that's why we're practicing.
Could you look at cost of cooling or heating the building once you have the rooftop garden established versus the cost that you previously had?
All right, so we could look at cost, but think about all the variables that we're going to have to keep in place. So how are we going to set it up so the only variable that is being changed is the temperature? I mean, well, is the only thing we're measuring is the temperature change. But what are the things that we have to have in place so that that's the only thing that is being changed? Are we going to be able to go into commercial buildings and measure their temperature change or get their electricity bills? Okay, so think about this. This could possibly be done by a student, but what would they have to do? Okay, Shannon, thank you. You said they could do models. That's what I was waiting for. And some of the others are saying at one temperature through the day, or how many times the heat or air conditioning turned on. But in order to do this, so Shannon, can you elaborate a little bit more about the models? Tell me about it in the, turn off your microphone. Let's talk about it.
I was thinking they could build like little model like buildings, and they would be, you know, the same, but then have one with like a rooftop garden, like a little, you know, plants on top of it, and then have thermometers within the buildings and be able to measure the temperatures and just have them out, you know, you can have them outside in the same conditions.
So, right. So that I think, you know, that could be doable by students if you think about it. They can enclose it. But what about their control? What are issues we might have to think about the control? What?
There's a lot of them. I mean, you would definitely have to have the models in the same conditions to be able to control that. Like make sure that you're testing it at the same time so that they're exposed to the same things. Or you have to have, you know, completely controlled environment.
Right. And so if you've got a green rooftop garden, what color roof do you think you might have to have?
So I guess you would need to also test a painted green roof and see if that, you know, makes a difference.
Right.
As one of your trials.
Right. So if they had a white roof versus a black roof, would that make a difference?
That could too. So I mean, they would have to think about those if it's color or if it's the actual plants that are making the difference.
Right. So there are a lot of things that they would have to set up. So this actually could end up being a great continuation experiment where they start testing one thing, maybe the color of the roofs and how that changes it, and then maybe get the coolest roof color and then see if the rooftop garden would reduce the temperature even more. So it could be like a continuation experiment. So it can be done, but it would need to be something that you would have to help the student break it down into something that they could actually accomplish.
Just like the paper towels, you know, there's a lot of variables they might not foresee. I mean, in an ideal situation, if they find a whole row of identical houses somewhere that were all abandoned, so you don't have to worry about the efficiency of the air conditioner, you know, whatever, they got same windows and doors and all that, and they could change the roof, you know, that would be nice. But yeah, models would be great. But one problem students have with models oftentimes, I didn't mention this last night, Judy, is scale. So if they build their models, and they shouldn't be little bitty tiny things, they should be, you know, have some size to them. If they build their models and they put 4 inches of soil and then grow plants on top of the house, and, you know, and it's really a scale model, they'd be about like having 10 feet of soil on a normal house, you know. So they got to have things that are similar, you know, very close to the right scale. And then they could have, like the things y'all are saying, shingles, different color shingles, different maybe metal roof and so on. And they can measure the temperature inside and keep them closed. And same place, everything the same.
So yes, it's doable, but we need to help them think about variables that they have to take into account. So the next one is, does changing a dog's food change its mannerisms? Now, if you go back to the rules and regulations, if you're going to work with animals, even if it's your pet dog, that would have to be approved by a veterinarian saying you're not going to be feeding your dog anything that's not good for them. You're basically looking at food preference that the dog may have or that type of thing. So that would need approvals to make sure that you're not mistreating an animal before they would get started. And
More than one dog too. You had to have more than one dog.
Right. And so looking at your testing number, if it's just one dog, then that might not make a whole lot of difference. So what is another issue that you see about being able to measure the results with this one? How do you determine a dog's mannerisms? what would be the measurement for mannerisms?
That's right. You can't talk to the dog, Katie.
Exactly. So you have to look at, this is one of these very subjective experiments. And if they want there to be a change, then often there is a change. So it's really hard. This is one of the things that it's hard to do. And you'll see very often you'll have issues with you where you have students want to look at how does looking at a color calm you, give you a feeling of calm, or does it make you angry? And I'm going, okay, and we get this a lot. It's one of those things that's really hard to measure because very often the test subject is going to be giving you the results that they think you want to have instead of giving you really results that would be accurate. And again, if you're using humans to be able to look at that, then you would have to have a human subject approval form taken out. So, which gets down to the last one. I actually jumped down to that, just looking at different colors, change a person's mood. And this is one that we see frequently, and it's one of those very subjective questions that's very hard to determine and very hard to measure, and would actually require special permissions, even though it's not something that would be harmful to a human. The fact that you are asking humans questions, you would have to have approval. So anytime you work with humans, you're going to need to have that approved by a committee that says either there is little to no risk, or there is a certain amount of risk, or there is a lot of risk. And they determine whether or not you can do that project by the amount of risk. And they also will determine the amount of permissions you have to have. Now, anytime you work with a minor or a person that has a limited mental capacity or physical capacity, or a woman who is pregnant, where you have a potential subject that when she's pregnant that can't give permissions one way or the other, you're incurring extra risk. And so that would be requiring extra permission. So anytime your student wants to do a human subject, I would suggest that you steer them to working with people over the age of 18 who can give their own permission instead of having to get parental permission. So let's skip to the next one. Which method, soil or water, of growing tomatoes worked the best? Now, and then which produced the fastest growth? That's the second question. And which produced the tallest growth? So this one, you've got actually 3 different questions in here. Working the best may have been defined by the fastest growth, or working the best may be the tallest growth. But you would need to settle upon just one of those when you're asking the question. But the rest of it looks like a really good question. What do you think about the next one? Kosher salt, rock salt, or table salt make ice cream freeze faster? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
When is it made? When did you determine the ice cream has been made?
How would you, okay, Manley asked a good question. How would you determine when it's been made? Any ideas?
So Katie said you could choose a specific temperature.
You could. That would work. That would be opening and checking it. If you're using an electric ice cream freezer, what happens when it gets too hard to turn?
Stops.
It turns off. It turns itself off when it gets too hard. So maybe everybody's still doing the hand crank one. I gave that up a long time ago. I didn't have anybody to crank it for me, so I got the electric one to make homemade ice cream. So,
yeah, but also it's the ice cream has different ingredients. It's much harder to make some kinds than others.
They all
Right.
got to be the same kind of ice cream with the exact same ingredients.
Mm. So maybe it needs to be just a little more specific.
Right. So, but that can be developed within their research plan. So I think that that's something that's doable. So you can look, your students are going to come to you with lots of questions. Some are going to be, questions that are great. Some of them are going to be questions that if you look at it a little bit more and specify it a little bit more, it'll turn into a great question. And some are going to be some that you're going to kind of go, maybe we need to look at doing this a little differently. So I'm going to give you, let me see what we're doing on time here.
4 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to go to this next one and look at some of the topics and questions to avoid. And I want you to look at this list, and those of you who have worked with students before, if you have seen some of these, do you see anything that you think could be changed, or maybe a topic taken and work on that? Okay, now this is from Science Buddies. So again, I'm my love-hate relationship. Some of the things that, I don't know, look at a few of these. The top one is when it's looking at a simple preference or taste comparison, which tastes better, Coke or Pepsi. You would need to have them give a numerical measurement in order to be able to do that, because it's subjective. Now, if you're in sales and you're selling a food product and you want to see how it was going to go over, people do that all the time, and they want to find out if the general public does it. What are some issues you would run into that you would need to be aware of if you are doing if a student is doing a taste test?
You might want to make sure they were in unlabeled bottles so they don't have a preconceived notion of which they like better.
Exactly, yes. So, and that is an issue. What's a safety issue?
Food allergies, says the girl who's allergic to sugar.
Okay, right. And that's something that we are more and more aware of in our classrooms. I know my granddaughter lives with me part of the time. Her dad's with me, lives here. And so it was, I was aware of all the limitations with the food allergies, but she had several students in her classroom that had specific food allergies. So when we were making lunches, I had to make sure none of those things were in her lunches that she would take to school, because they couldn't even be in the room. She was in the kindergarten, and they don't really trust the kids from not passing things around. So the food allergies is something that is really big. So if you're going to do a taste test, it may seem like that's very minimal. Again, you're working with humans that would need to have an informed consent. And as part of that, you would say the items that are being tested may contain this, 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 and this, to make sure they're aware. This is not if you're doing students, it would have to go back to the parents to sign it, as well as the student. So this is another time you would probably want to go to someone over 18.
All right, so Judy, it is 10:50. Do we want to make this our stopping point?
Yes, and let me see, we will talk a little bit about engineering activities and projects when we get started. I'll stay on board and if everyone wants to do their bathroom break, and then come back and we'll go from there.
Great.
But
All
I will
right.
stay online in case you have any questions.
Actually, can we pop them into the new room for questions?
Let's hop in the new room for questions then.
Okay. Perfect. So folks, we will jump off of this one and we will jump into the next room, which is just the next link on your website. So we will see you in just a couple minutes. Have a good break.